I was never afraid to fail. I was afraid to begin. My life didn't collapse. It stayed suspended. I spent years getting ready for a life I never entered. The realization came not with a shout but with a pinprick. A small, stubborn pinprick that kept returning whenever I stood in the doorway of a room I claimed I would inhabit. I learned to measure time in quiet decays. Dust on shelves, the hush between tasks, the slow sun crossing a desk I kept rearranging. The days didn't slip away in a hurry. They settled in the way a good chair holds you once you sit down. I wasn't avoiding hard choices. I was counting on being properly equipped. By the time I finished a plan, I could call it solid. By the time I saved enough, I could afford to wait. By the time I learned enough, I could pretend not to wonder what might happen if I finally began. The pattern wasn't dramatic. It was precise, almost polite, as if courtesy demanded it. I grew skilled at almost ready, almost capable, almost certain the moment would arrive when my hands would be trustworthy enough to start. The word almost became a shelter, a place to retreat when the world grew loud or uncertain. In the almost, I found permission to study, to dream, to observe life from a safe distance. If I paused long enough, I could tell myself I was building something durable. If I paused long enough, the world's disorder could be blamed for my restraint. The right time never arrived with fanfare. It came as a suggestion, then as a routine. I waited for confidence to appear, for money to accumulate, for permission to be granted by people who never really held it. Waiting felt responsible. Waiting felt smart. Waiting felt mature. I practiced patience with a seriousness that felt almost noble, as if I were preserving something fragile by not touching it too soon. I rehearsed life instead of living it. Conversations that never happened. Smiles saved for later. Stories prepared for a moment that never came. I practiced certainty in the mirror of possibility and kept notebooks of things I would say when the time was right. The rehearsals didn't prepare me for action. They protected me from risk. They softened failure before it could happen and kept regret far enough away to ignore. Responsibility wore a familiar face. It looked like prudence, foresight, restraint. It's easy to mistake hesitation for wisdom when the world rewards speed with noise. I told myself I wasn't avoiding life, I was learning it. That starting too early would dilute what I might become. That I owed the future a better version of myself. It sounded reasonable because it was reasonable. Time felt like a resource to be managed, not a force that would move whether I cooperated or not. Fear wore a respectable mask. It dressed as patience and called it self-care. It whispered that preparation was love for the craft, not fear of exposure. That beginning too soon would reveal incompetence. That staying near the door was safer than crossing the threshold. It offered a clean narrative, one where I was always close, never committed, never forced to learn what waited on the other side. I believed that starting later would mean starting better. It's comforting arithmetic. Refine yourself, remove uncertainty, reduce risk. Wait long enough and the universe will align. The logic felt generous, almost kind. It was also a soft trap, a gravity that pulled me towards stillness without the noise of disaster. People around me moved forward. Their lives leaned into momentum like weather. Conversations that might have changed me ended with someday. Partnerships formed. Risks were taken. Lives unfolded. Love, which requires presence, drifted into the category of future plans. I stayed in the bleachers, documenting possibilities while others stepped onto the field. Let's do this when I'm ready. I'll start once I've saved enough. We'll decide after this project. The sentences sounded careful, even virtuous, but they carried an assumption that life could be paused and resumed on demand. That intention alone could hold a place in time. Time didn't agree, kept moving. The days stacked quietly. Coffee cooling on a desk, sunlight going unused through a window, books unread, plans untouched. Life didn't break. It continued, patient, uninterrupted. The cost was invisible. No dramatic loss, just a dulling of curiosity, a fading appetite for discovery. The energy that might have carried me forward thinned into reserve. Questions that could have been answered with action grew quieter. until they barely asked themselves at all. There was no failure loud enough to notice, no catastrophe to explain my condition, just ordinary days, undisturbed on the surface, while something beneath them shifted. The awareness arrived softly, a hesitation when someone asked about my future, a call I didn't make because I believed waiting would be understood, a sentence that surfaced during a routine task. You are always almost ready, but you are never beginning. There was no breakdown, only recognition. I didn't think I must change. I realized I already had. I had become the person who waits, who postpones, who mistakes restraint for growth even as it erodes the present. I said it aloud once, quietly, in an empty room. I have learned to live with the almost, not as a complaint, as a description. Almost had become how I existed in the world, always near the start, never inside it. There is no redemption here, no sudden turn. Awareness didn't erase the habit. It clarified it. I still understand why I waited. The future felt heavy. I wanted to protect what I might become. But the result is visible in the quiet corners. Unfinished work, unbreathed projects, relationships that never reached their season. Time continued with its ordinary grammar. Work, meals, weather. The tests of time are not loud. They are patient. They teach you the shape of the life you rehearsed instead of lived. If there is an ending, it is not triumph. It is a breath that settles after an honest truth. Almost is not a bridge. It is a carefully built fence around a place you never enter. What does it mean to choose a life you can endure without ever fully beginning it? When does patience become wisdom, and when does it become surrender? These questions don't demand answers. They linger. Time doesn't announce itself. It leans. Slowly. I am not a warning. I am a mirror. A life shaped by hesitation, measured against its own delays. The doorway is still there. The room remains unentered. And sometimes, in the quiet, I hear my own name spoken by the past. The self who waited, who believed waiting was wisdom, who never quite began. If you listen long enough, you might hear yourself in that echo. Not as advice, not as instruction, just as a truth that refuses to leave, the reminder that beginnings rarely arrive with courage. They arrive with a small decision, and everything else follows quietly whether you are ready or not.